Capital allocation. This is one of the most intriguing topics within the subject of marketing and one that's often really difficult for executives and teams to think through. So there are many ways to approach budgeting and capital allocation, whether you're doing it per channel, a territory analysis for your outreach, whether you're thinking about it in quarters or annually. So I'm going to give you some primary kind of simple frameworks to think through the budgeting process. Doesn't mean this is the only answer to budgeting, but if you think through some of these scenarios and some of the concerns that we're dealing with in the budgeting process, this training should give you a really solid foundation to have smart discussions and strategic investments that are going to lead to success for your organization or the organizations that you're leading. So the easiest way to think about budgeting for marketing is as a percentage of revenue. There are other ways to think about it, which I'll talk about in a second, but percentage of the revenue is the best way to think about marketing budgeting from my perspective, because it really simplifies the process, but also makes organizations commit to getting their marketing right. So some organizations will try to fluctuate their budget based on how they're doing, based on cash flow concerns, based on they're seeing what's working and what's not. And for a lot of reasons, that is the wrong approach. If you are just consistent with your budget from an annual standpoint, then what your team's going to do if things are not going as well as you would like them to is they're going to figure it out. So as I often say, there's no such thing as a marketing channel that doesn't work. There is just errors in the way that you're approaching messaging, audience, or timing. And so rather than saying this channel doesn't work or marketing's not working, you need to say, are we talking to the right people with the right message at the right time? And we got to figure out what that is. How are people going to figure that out if there's no budget to be pushing data through the campaigns to test things, to be hiring the staff to run the campaigns? So we need a fixed marketing budget just to allow us to become really good as an organization at marketing. Now, what percentage of revenue are we going to spend? The percentage that we're going to spend is variable based on generally the funding or reimbursement mechanisms that you have for your organization. So Medicaid organizations will sometimes spend as little as 2% of total revenue on marketing, whereas private pay organizations will spend as much as 20% of their revenue on marketing. And obviously commercial is in between. So every organization is going to be a little bit different. That's a wide range there. If you're closer to the Medicaid area, you should be smaller in your percentage of revenue. If you're higher on the private pay side, or if you're out of network, then you're going to have a higher percentage that you're generally spending on marketing. And that's perfectly okay, because you're still going to have a really good profit at the end of the day, as long as you're managing that percentage of spend well. So historical data is obviously an important part of this discussion. The most important thing we're looking at for historical data is blended cost per new patient acquisition, or in general marketing speak, we'll call this CAC, CAC, customer acquisition cost. Customer acquisition cost should be blended. Now, what does blended mean? It means all of your channels together. You're running Facebook, you have boots on the ground outreach, you have PPC, you have SEO. Your blended CAC, your blended cost per new patient acquisition, is total marketing spend across all those channels divided by the total number of new patients that are coming in a year. Now, of course, you're going to say right there, well, Nick, I don't want to know my blended. I want to know my per channel CAC. I want to know what my PPC, cost per new patient acquisition, is versus Facebook versus TV. So I'm going to tell you right here that is the absolute wrong way to think about marketing budgeting. There is no way you can get a CAC per channel. Sometimes with PPC or with our business development outreach, we have a pretty strong directionality. We have a very good idea of what we would call a final attribution model, or a linear relationship between effort or campaign, click, and inquiry, and a new patient admission. Very strong directionality, but it's still not perfect. Why did someone click on your Google ad? Was it because the ad was great, or was it because they had just talked to a nurse yesterday and that nurse had talked to one of your outreach reps and that nurse had then recommended the facility to the patient? They forgot about it, went home, did a Google search, saw your name in the Google ad and clicked it. Or maybe they've seen 15 Facebook campaigns and some TV campaigns from you over the past 6 months. And so when they finally needed services, again, they didn't really think about you, but they went to Google, they searched, there were 3 different ads for services, and they chose yours because you were top of mind based on the other campaigns that they had seen in the past. There's no such thing as a pure CAC per channel. Every single channel is influenced by other channels. Your PPC and your outreach have a higher probability of being a very direct influence on a new patient inquiry, but that does not mean that they are operating independently. And of course, your reputation also plays a factor in the success of any of your channels. So with your historical data, we're looking at that blended because we do not have a per channel cost. And again, really good marketing is multi-touch. I should be expecting 7 to 12 touches of different patients or their family members or the individuals doing the referrals before they actually inquire with us. So for this reason, we want to be strategic in the way that we are approaching our channel strategy. We cannot build our channel strategy just on historical data. And that's why I'm saying take a percentage of revenue approach rather than taking a per channel data or historical data approach. I'll give you a really good example. We just signed on a new client that is spending $1 million a month on their PPC campaigns with $0 in Facebook, $0 on TV, $0 on any other channel. The only other marketing investment they have is with boots on the ground outreach. So this is a huge organization, right? They're spending $1 million a month just on PPC alone, plus a very significant budget for their outreach team. And they are focused on these 2 channels. Why? Why would any organization have such an undiversified marketing spend? Because of this problem that I encounter all of the time with executives or with private equity firms setting budgets. They can see the PPC spend. And so they can see the click, the inquiry, the new patient admission. They can see the outreach rep. The outreach rep gets the call, makes a referral, and they see the new patients coming in. So because there's a clear linear relationship, they assume that that channel is working and the other channels are not working. Maybe they've tried Facebook, maybe they've tried TV, but when they tried those channels, they couldn't see the same thing they saw on their PPC campaigns, so they said, oh, these channels don't work. Well, here's a huge problem. So for this particular service line, again, we've got $3 billion across the healthcare space. I can tell you average costs from a channel strategy standpoint. I can tell you costs for geographies. I can tell you costs for service lines, for types of insurance reimbursement. Like I have the data nationally, not just from the hundreds of millions of spend that we've managed ourselves, but from taking over from very large marketing firms in this industry or taking over from teams from very large providers in different service lines and verticals. Across that data, for this particular service line, the average cost per new patient from a PPC campaign is $5,000 for an in-network insurance policy. I will tell you for a fact that that is over 40% of the total revenue per patient. That is not profitable for this organization. So if this is not profitable for the organization, why in the hell are they investing $1 million a month in an unprofitable channel? Because again, when they look at it from a data standpoint, this is the only data that they can see that gives them a very, very clear outcome. They can't see the results of the Facebook. They can't see the results of the TV because they're thinking about data wrong. They're thinking about strategy wrong. They should be looking at qualified inquiry volume lift. They should be looking at that lift over a 3 to 6 month window. They need to make sure that their messaging is on point when they're running those campaigns, their audience targeting is on point, their timing's on point. And oftentimes when providers have failed at display channels, it's because something is wrong with the way that they're running campaigns. But this provider, at least before we took over, was struggling. Why are they reaching out to us? Why do they want a new marketing agency partner? Because they're not successful. They're struggling. And one of the reasons they're struggling is because they have an unsophisticated approach to their marketing channel strategy, and they're too obsessed with granular linear relationships in a final attribution model, which is not going to get them a sustainable cost per new patient admission. Again, $3 billion worth of data, when we have diversified multi-channel marketing running across service lines, across different healthcare provider types, the multi-channel strategy always delivers an overall cost per new patient acquisition that is 4 to 5 times cheaper than anything that we will see with a single channel strategy. And that's because we get those multiple touch points in there. That's because the channels have a cumulative effect by interplaying with each other. It's very, very important that you have multi-channel campaigns running, assuming you have the budget for multiple campaigns, which I'll talk about in a second. If you don't have historical data, you should have benchmark data. You can talk to agencies like us, you can talk to colleagues, you can go to conferences. There's lots of ways to get benchmark data for your service line or your particular healthcare vertical, and that'll help give you some ideas of what other people are spending, what they're seeing as a cost per inquiry per channel, what they're seeing as a cost per click per channel, or a CPM per channel. Because remember, cost per inquiry is not the primary metric we're using for a lot of our marketing channels, but we will look at leading indicators in terms of cost per clicks, CPMs, how many people you're reaching for a given spend, etc. Of course, we need to keep in mind that there's ramp up times. There's no magical button that we press that just gets us new patients. Doesn't matter what channel strategy you're running. And so if we hire a new outreach rep, that person's not going to start on day one and just bringing in new patient referrals. They're going to need time to cultivate relationships, to make themselves known, to build trust with community partners, and then to start obviously bringing in referrals that are going to lead to new patients. There's a ramp up time that has to be built into our marketing budget. So where this really comes into play is if we're thinking about acquisition or expansion through de novo builds, or if we're looking at opening a new service line. Like if we decide to start serving veterans and we make a healthcare service that is geared towards veterans in our community, we're not going to get flooded with veterans overnight. We're going to have to build the marketing campaigns for those. We're going to have to build the relationships with the VA. We're going to have to build relationships with military families, military bases. These are going to take time. There is a ramp up phase, especially if you are a new organization. If your healthcare service is newer, it's a start that you've just invested in, I always tell people from a pro forma standpoint, they should be waiting at least 18 months to even start to break even from a cash flow standpoint. So in the pro forma, there should be 18 months of marketing spend that are built out to be able to get through that opening phase. That's not always the case. It does depend on the service line. We've seen services get profitable within 6 months. But the vast majority of healthcare providers take at least 18 months to ramp up. And so obviously you're going to be losing less over time, right? We're not going to be losing everything from a marketing standpoint or investment standpoint. As we progress, our campaign should be getting better, our outreach team should be getting better, we should be getting word of mouth through the community. So we'll start to get closer and closer to break even. But on average, 18 months is a really good conservative framework for most healthcare service lines to break even on a new location or a new service line or a new model entirely. So definitely make sure that you're building a ramp up phase into your budgeting process. Seasonality is also really common in healthcare. So during the summer, we might see people using less intensive services because they're going on vacation or they don't have the interest in coming into care because they want to do something with their summertime. If you are servicing Medicaid, you will often see an uptick in patients coming into treatment in the colder months. They want to get out of the cold, they're more miserable, they're less likely to be willing to tough it out or deal with the issue, or maybe they just want to, again, get out of the cold. So Medicaid will often see an uptick for a lot of providers in colder months. Now, so how do we think about that seasonality from a budgeting standpoint? The best way to think about it is to spend more money when you have higher interest. Think about this like the retail space. When do retailers spend most of their marketing budgets? Some retailers will spend 70% of their annual marketing budget just within the Black Friday and holiday shopping window. because that's when people are primed to buy. Remember, the right time is a really important component of good marketing. And so when people are primed to buy, then we want to spend more money because we're actually going to have more patients coming into our service for a lower cost because they're more motivated or more interested in coming in. We have to do less work on the marketing side to get them to choose us. So when you have a high interest period, so for example, if it's the winter for your Medicaid provider, or if it's a non-summer month or a non-holiday time, you have more patients showing interest, spend more money from a marketing standpoint. Now on the flip side, you might say that you should spend less money when there is less interest. And that's absolutely correct if you have flexible overhead. So the way that we think about this is if we've got fixed overhead, like we can't let staff go, we can't furlough them, we can't bring down our facility costs, we can't bring down our software costs. So fixed overhead. That means that we need a certain volume just to have the cash flow to meet that overhead. So in those situations, unfortunately, I'm either going to have to accept the loss during the seasonality and make sure that we're significantly profitable other points of the year, or I'm going to need to spend more money from a marketing standpoint because I need volume, right? So it's just like a standard business model, especially in healthcare. If we're looking at a Medicaid model, we need high volume because we have low margin. So because our margin is getting reduced due to less new patients coming into the program, we need to get more of them in, or we at least need to spend more marketing dollars because we have to reach more people and do more work to convince them, to build trust, to get them to choose us in months when they're less likely to come in. So we're spending more money for often the same result. And that's because we have a fixed overhead cost and we just have to manage that cash flow. Now, if I do have a lot of flexibility, if I can send a large amount of my staff on vacation, if they're okay with being furloughed for certain parts of the year, if I have other ways to significantly reduce cost, then I would recommend that you bring your marketing budget down because you need less patients to cover your cash flow concerns. You're going to have to spend more on the marketing front if you want to get results. So it can make a lot of economic sense to bring down your overhead, bring down your labor, and then bring down your marketing spend commensurate with that, just to meet the lower demand of new patients needed for that low time in your seasonality. I always do remind people we want to account for failure. I know very, very few businesses that are just like this. Most businesses have dips and peaks. They kind of, maybe they'll climb over time. Maybe they'll have a whole year where they're flat, right? Why does that happen? For lots of reasons. There's changes in the market. There's changes in the way that consumers are doing search. There's changes in the Google algorithm. TikTok gets banned, and so we can't use it as a marketing channel anymore. We have an employee that makes a big mistake. We have a campaign that we thought was going to be great, but is a total flop. Right? Lots of reasons for there to be failures, and so we should account for that in our marketing thinking. If we're looking at our general cost per admission, our historical cost per admission is $300 blended. That means that we have a floor in our marketing spend. It means that we need to get at least, if we want 10 new patients a month, we need to spend $3,000 a month from a marketing standpoint, right? That's our marketing floor. It's our cost per admission. But again, we should allow for a little bit of error in there. This isn't math. We don't spend $300 and get a patient. That's just an average of what happened the prior year. So we should always build a little bit of flexibility into the budget from that standpoint. And always also, I should really harp on that. That floor is important. So if we need 10 patients a month, we're a really small provider, and we know our average blended cost per admission last year was $300, well, we have to spend $3,000 if we want to get 10 patients in per month. If we try to cut our marketing costs, well, now we're going below the floor, and so there's no way for us to achieve that 10. Same thing if we want to get more patients than previous years. If we want to double our patient volume, we're not going to be able to do that at the same marketing cost. We are going to need to double our marketing spend because we know our floor is $300 on average as a cost per new patient. So now I know that I need to be spending $6,000 a month as a minimum. Like, those floors are really important to keep in mind. when we're thinking about setting goals for our team. Are we going to up the goal and not up their budget and not up their resources? There's times when that can work, right? Reps get better over time, campaigns build momentum over time, but there's also tons of headwinds. You have a new competitor enter your market, the Google algorithm shifts, consumer behavior, patient behavior shifts. So these headwinds are outside of your control, and it's often not a good idea to bank on the fact that things are just going to get easier, because they rarely do. A note for startups, again, that 18-month window is something that I really consider to be a smart, conservative estimate for your standard pro forma. Also realize you're going to have to spend a lot more on marketing. So I just gave that example of a $300 cost per admission for a particular service line. Now, would a new provider get that? No way. They don't have a reputation. They don't have relationships built into the community. They don't have Google reviews online to help build trust with people. And so they're going to be spending a lot more to get a new patient in the door. Also in healthcare, often we're starting out of network for a lot of service lines. We don't get in network for a couple months. So we're going to get a much smaller volume of patients that are willing to come in from an out of network standpoint if we are traditionally in an in-network competitive environment. So that's going to cost us more. And because our marketing channels aren't built up, our outreach team does not have established relationships, our Facebook, our TV, our X campaigns, our LinkedIn campaigns haven't had time to run, to build frequency, to move from awareness to the convince stage. So there's going to be a lot of upfront cost in that sense, and so we have to have a higher marketing budget. We'll often tell new providers that they should have about 50% of their admissions coming from a digital spend and usually a PPC spend when they're opening a program or a new service line, because that's the only place that you can get patients from in the near term is your PPC. Your outreach takes time. All of your display campaigns take time. And so your PPC is your only bet. Your PPC is super expensive. And so you really have to have a big marketing budget to support that. Okay, so now let's get into the nitty gritty of setting the channel allocations, right? We talked about our overall budget as a percentage. That's important, but how do we think about it from a per channel standpoint? Because we do have to think strategically about breaking that down. Even though I strongly discourage executives from thinking about a per channel cost per patient acquisition, we do need to think about cost per channel budgeting. I always start with outreach for most healthcare service providers. Unless like you're just a local dentist office who you don't have enough revenue or you don't even have the need because dental services are in such high demand, we don't need an outreach rep. Most healthcare service providers have an outreach rep, and their outreach that builds the community referral relationships tend to account for about 50% of patients in a lot of healthcare service lines. So if outreach and community referrals are bringing in the majority of your patients, that should be where you're starting with from a marketing standpoint. So really important to set that budget first. And I generally recommend that an outreach rep brings in 10 times their salary in revenue. If you're paying your outreach rep $10,000 a month, they should be bringing in $100,000 a month in new revenue. If they're $5,000 a month, $50,000 a month in new revenue. So that's a baseline expectation. And how many patients that revenue equates to depends on your reimbursement structure, on what your service lines are. On the Medicaid side, we need a lot more patient volume to account for that. On the private side, that might be only 1 or 2 patients would bring in that much revenue. So it just completely depends on your reimbursement model. But start there. You want to make sure that outreach reps aren't tripping on each other's toes. You always keep in mind that the farther out you go geographically from a distance standpoint, the less successful your reps are going to be, the farther away they get. And every service line has a different radius that people are comfortable going to. So start and hire your reps first and make sure you have at least 1, and then maybe 2 or 3 depending on the amount of territory that they're covering or the density of your area. So if you're in a really highly dense area like in LA, then you might have 2 or 3 reps just to cover the north, the south, and the west, for example. After outreach, usually recommend providers to be investing in SEO. Consistently across service lines, SEO generally supports the reduction in your overall CAC and your costs per acquisition for new customers and new patients. And so if you're lowering that cost through SEO, that's going to bring your blended down. SEO is really cheap because once you start ranking on Google, there's a high volume there. People tend to trust Google results, so they have historically, and so you have good conversion rates off of Google. You see higher commercial insurance with Google. So if you compare Google Ads with just regular Google search, about 90% of people clicking a Google ad are Medicaid. About 75% are clicking organic results that are Medicaid. So flip that. 25% of those clicking on Google Organic are commercially insured. 10% clicking a Google ad are commercially insured. So you have 2.5 times more people clicking on organic search results in Google than you do on the ad campaigns. So lots of value to a Google search, and because you get exponential results over time, it's really valuable. Now, how do you think about that from a budgeting standpoint? So just as an example, like for my team internally to produce one piece of good SEO content, it costs me $750. So I've got my web developer that uploads that. I've got my graphic designer that makes images. I've got the content writer that writes it. I got the editor that checks their work. I've got the SEO specialist that optimizes that content. And I actually have three. I have a technical, I have an on-page and an off-page for each single account. But most providers or internal providers and a lot of small agencies are only going to have one SEO person. So it's costing me $750 in pure labor spend. Now that's not counting any of my overhead. It doesn't count the $20,000 a month we spend on MarTech. It doesn't count our lease costs. It doesn't count my management overhead costs, right? It doesn't count our HR overhead costs. None of that is included in that $750. So let's say that you're a small provider and you want to spend $1,000 a month on SEO. That's only going to get you one piece of content. And obviously you can't hire internally for it. You can try and hire a writer to write a piece of content, but that writer is not going to SEO optimize it. You're not going to get good graphics out of it. You're not going to have anyone copy editing it. There's going to be no strategy behind it. There's going to be a low level, someone with less experience, let's say, that's just going to be willing to write content from a freelance standpoint. So that's not going to get you the result that you need either. So your floor, I'd say your floor in terms of investing in a multi-channel strategy, you should be doing at least $2 million a year in annual revenue. That's going to give you the budget to have enough revenue to have a percentage of spend going into a multi-channel strategy. If you're under $2 million a year in revenue, then you're doing a lot of sweat equity, you're doing a lot of scrambling, you're just trying to make do with what you can based on the resources you have available. So if you got at least $2 million a year in revenue, your minimum SEO investment should be $2,500 per month. And $2,500 per month would be per location or per website. So if you are a provider that has multiple locations and each of those locations is doing at least $2 million a year in revenue, then you should have $2,500 a month per location from an SEO standpoint. Now, $2,500 a month is not a lot. You're getting maybe two pieces of content. You're still not talking about off-page. You're not talking about citations or backlinks or your local optimizations for your Google My Business profiles. So there's a lot that still needs to be done with a small budget. Now, if we think we're creating two pieces of content for $750 a piece, that's $1,500 for two pieces of content. Your average SEO silo is a minimum of 10 pieces of content, just as a small SEO silo. So at two pieces of content a month, it's taking us 5 months just to build out a single silo or a single service line for what we are providing within our healthcare vertical. 5 months is a long time to just get a single silo just start to be built. So you can see how long it would take to really start to see significant results from SEO on a small budget. So you can see if we're only getting two pieces of content done per month, that's going to take us 5 months to create 10 pieces of content, which is just the bare minimum needed for an SEO silo. It's going to take us a long time to get any kind of results from that. Should you be investing in that? Yes. If you are doing at least $2 million a year in revenue, you should be doing that $2,500 a month investment in SEO, but it's not going to get you results very fast. It's going to be a very, very slow build. So for most providers that are doing over $2 million a year in revenue, they should be investing at least $5,000 a month in SEO per website or per location. So again, if you're doing per location, you're thinking over $2 million a year in revenue per location, right? Because each location should be thought about as having its own P&L. Same thing from a service line standpoint. If you really want to accelerate your SEO results, then you should be thinking about the budget for that service line and then investing comparatively in it, because you need to build out content for that. You need to do outreach for that, for your backlinks. You have to do all of your technical optimizations within those silos. And so by giving a dedicated budget per service line, you're going to accelerate the results and be working on all of your service lines at the same time versus having an internal team or an agency just work on a silo at a time, which will take a long time to build out all of your silos. So $5,000 a month is your minimum. That's the floor if you are making at least a decent amount of revenue per location. Now, one of our large clients spends $1 million a month on their SEO budget. Of course, they're national. They have multiple locations across the country. We get an incredible blended cost per new patient admission off of that $1 million a month in spend. It's very profitable from a return standpoint for them, so it makes sense. So you can spend a lot of money on this, but again, you'd have to be a national provider with a lot of locations, with a lot of different websites. On average, you're thinking $5,000 floor. And then I strongly recommend, if you are making $10 million a year or more in revenue per location, you should be spending at least $10,000 a month on your SEO. That's just going to accelerate the results. It's not going to take you so long, because then you can work on multiple silos at a time. You'll see some agencies make recommendations based on the number of keywords that you're working on. It's a similar thought process. So rather than thinking per location and optimizing each location for the local algorithm, ideally with a unique website, or optimizing different service lines, they say, okay, well, you need keywords for service line A and keywords for service line B, and so we'll just charge you on a per keyword basis. That's an okay way to think about it as well. I'm not as big of a fan of that approach, because the service lines, when you think about it as having an individual P&L, we want to be working on that particular service line, building out that silo, building out the second tier content, building backlinks to that particular silo for that service line. That's what's going to generate revenue for us. Versus if we're just thinking from a keyword standpoint, it doesn't give us as much directionality. Then maybe the agency, especially if they're not familiar with your business model, they might invest all of that time in a single silo, build out that silo, and then slowly move on to the next one and the next one. That often is not as advantageous as if you're working on multiple locations, which are multiple P&Ls, or multiple service lines, which are multiple P&Ls. So I've got my outreach rep, I've got their salary, then I've got our SEO budget based on our revenue. That's going to be $25,000, $5,000, or generally $10,000 a month per website or per location. Then I go to PPC. So that is our Google ads, our Bing ads. This is our bottom of funnel channel, right? People are in the final decision-making stage. This is one of our highest cost channels. Now, some providers will build their entire business model on PPC, and it can be profitable. So I'll give you a crazy example. So for a lot of healthcare providers, this probably sounds nuts. For people that run private programs like wellness spas or cosmetic surgery, maybe not so much. But an average teen patient into a residential program will bring in at least $90,000 in revenue. So teen residential programs used to be private pay or all out of network. They would get at least $30,000 a month per patient, and then the average patient stay was about 3 months. So one new patient coming to the program generated $90,000 in revenue. Teen treatment programs were willing to pay up to $30,000 as a cost per new patient acquisition, because it was still profitable for them. They still had $60,000 in revenue to cover all the rest of their overhead and still make a healthy margin. So in that sense, we could run really high cost PPC campaigns and have CACs of $20,000 to $30,000, and the teen treatment providers were still happy. Now that's crazy. That's a complete waste of money. Had they taken that money and invested in Facebook, invested in TV, invested in LinkedIn, invested in more outreach, would they have had a cheaper blended cost per new patient admission? 100%. Absolutely. But because, again, they couldn't see the click to the inquiry to the admission, they were unwilling to invest in those channels because they couldn't see a return within 2 weeks rather than 3 months. They weren't willing to invest in those channels, and because it was profitable for them, there wasn't an impetus, there was no real drive to make a change. Now, team treatment's a really good example. Everything's moving in network now, as we've seen with a lot of behavioral health service lines. As it moves in network, no one's willing to pay out of pocket, no one wants to pay out of network rates, and so these in-network programs are getting reimbursements that are 1/4 of what providers got when they were getting private pay or out-of-network reimbursement rates. So now they cannot afford to run a PPC campaign. Just like the example of the client that we signed on that's doing $1 million a month in PPC, it's not affordable for them, but at one point in the past it was, because they were an out-of-network model, because reimbursement rates were higher. And so as the market has shifted, they have not shifted along with it, and they're not thinking strategically about how to build a multi-channel campaign. So when we think about PPC, we want to see a max of 10% of total monthly admissions coming from a PPC channel because it's high cost. Now, maybe for your service line, it is still profitable to bring in patients from a PPC standpoint alone. That doesn't mean it's a smart business decision, because your blended cost per new patient acquisition is always going to be cheaper when you're running multi-channel campaigns. PPC charges you a lot because they know it's a high intent inquiry. So your cost, your CPM cost, is always going to be significantly higher. Plus, again, there's less relevance for providers. They don't know who you are. You don't really have any trust built up with them for most callers. And so they're just clicking an ad and calling you after looking at the website for 10 seconds. That doesn't build a reputation long term in a community. And so it doesn't drive any long-term value. And so there's just a lot of things that are detrimental about an over-reliance on PPC, aside from the cost. So we say keep it to 10%. So now you're going to figure out what that is for you, right? What's your average cost per inquiry? What's your conversion rate on the phone? That will give you an average cost per new patient acquisition, and that will give you your PPC spend. So if your PPC cost per new patient acquisition is around $300 and you want 10% because you want 100 new patients a month, 10% of those new patients is 10 times 300 is 3,000. We're going to spend 3,000 a month on PPC. That's how we would recommend thinking about and setting your PPC budgets. The only exception to that is, again, new locations, new service lines. Often we'll try to fill 50% of a new service line with PPC because it is the only channel that has a short-term lever. Even though it's really expensive, even though it's often not profitable, in our pro forma, we're thinking downline. We're willing to take a loss in the beginning to build a reputation, to get patients through the door so that we're building word of mouth in the community, we're building up online reviews, people are seeing patients in the program. So there's, even though it's a loss, it brings long-term value to the program if we invest that money up front. So I've got my outreach reps with their salaries. I've got my SEO budget determined based on our revenue size, the number of websites we have, the number of locations that we have. I've got PPC set as 10% of admissions based on what our average cost per new patient admission is for PPC. And then everything else is going to go into your display channels, whether that's $10,000 a month, whether it's $100,000 a month. You should be taking your percentage of revenue that we determined at the beginning when we set out to do our budget, and we should be putting the rest into display. Now, how do we determine display channels? Should we invest in Facebook? Should we invest in X? Should we invest in LinkedIn? This comes down again to where your audience is. If we're targeting older individuals, then we are more likely to use Facebook than X or Snapchat. If we're trending a little bit younger, then we're looking at TikTok or Snapchat over Facebook. If we're looking for more B2B referrals from community partners, then we're looking at LinkedIn. So it depends on our audience in terms of where we're starting. Then we're looking at size. So we want to reach our entire audience. There's no point in reaching an audience if we're not going to reach all of it on a regular basis, including frequency. I've talked about in other modules, you want a minimum of 3 to 4 as a frequency per week. So let's say that we were trying to reach, we're in a small community and we're trying to reach 100,000 people in our audience. on whatever display channel we've chosen. So our CPM is $10 on that channel. That means I need to spend $1,000 if I want to reach 100,000 people once. Well, remember, I want to reach them 3 or 4 times a week. So I'm talking about $3,000 a week, which is going to be $12,000 a month to reach my entire audience with the frequency targets that I have. So if $12,000 a month reaches my audience and I still have money left over in the budget, now I'm going to expand to the next channel. So maybe we've got our $12,000 a month invested in Facebook, and then maybe we'll spend $12,000 a month on TikTok, and then we still have money left in the budget, and so we will expand that to X. Again, we're thinking through our audiences in terms of where our audiences are as we think about our channel expansion, but then we want to max out a channel rather than diversify across multiple channels. I would rather reach our target market with the desired frequency on a single platform rather than only reach half of them or reach all of them, but not with the frequency targets we have in place, and then diversify that spend. So always think about maxing out your channel spend first based on audience size and frequency before adding on the next channel. Some questions around budget optimization and how we think about that. A question I get a lot of the time is, well, we want to double down. We want to double the amount of patients we have coming in. Let's take PPC. Maybe it's going really well for us and we are getting we're very comfortable, we're very happy with the cost per new patient acquisition that we have. And so we want to double. And so can we double the PPC spend? And the answer is 99% of the time, no. So why is that the case? Well, first off, if you just double your money, then you're throwing a bunch more data into the system that it didn't have before. And so that is messing up both your human teams and the AI's capability to optimize those in a reasonable time frame because it's happening too fast. Also, we don't know what the effect is going to be. So we've got it dialed in. We got to have these keywords running with these ad groups, with these ads. And because we've done a good job optimizing those, we're getting a good CAC. But now if we double the spend, we might be having to push into new key terms. And those new key terms are going to need different ads. And those new ads are going to need different landing pages. And so now we don't know what the optimizations for those are going to be. We don't know exactly what's going to work. We haven't split tested the messaging. We haven't split tested images. And so for all those reasons, just throwing more money at it is unlikely to achieve an immediate result. Same thing for the keyword groups that we're going into. So maybe at our $10,000 a month spend, we were focused on high intent key terms. But if we spend $20,000 a month, now we don't have those high intent key terms that are left. That search volume is already maxed out. So we have to expand into mid-level inquiry interest or mid-level inquiry volume. So these are people that are thinking about treatment or thinking about your service, but they're not quite sure that they want it. So we're expanding to those key terms. Well, they're not going to convert at the same rate as the high intent key terms. So we have to optimize differently. We're going to have a higher cost per new patient acquisition no matter what we do because they're just not as interested. They're a mid-tier inquiry segment of the population. And so we can't just double. So what we recommend is a 10% increase every week on PPC or other channels if we do want to expand. 10% usually allows the human team as well as the AI algorithms to increase things in a way that allows them to assess what's working, what's not working, to get data gradually into the system, to think through the split testing so that we're going to get the best result for those campaigns. Diminishing returns always happens. As I just mentioned, you'll tap stuff out. There's only so many people searching per day for your service. And so it doesn't matter how much money you add to it. If you've already capped out the number of searches that are available on a particular channel, throwing more money at it is not going to change anything, right? Think about it again. You've got your 10 people in a room. I've got 10 people I'm talking to. I've got one outreach rep that's there. He can talk to those 10 people. Is it going to help for me to double my marketing spend and have 2 outreach reps in a room with 10 people? Not needed. That's just going to be a waste of money. I'm not going to get an added advantage to that. Same way on the marketing channels. There's only so much search volume per day. There's only so many people interested in a given audience. So if we're reaching 100,000 people and only 10% of them are particularly interested in our services, spending more money is not going to increase the percentage of that audience that is potentially interested in our services. So we have to be thinking about these effects, as well as things like geographic distance, the farther out we get. So maybe we're doing really well, we're happy with our cost per new patient acquisition, but then we still want more patients. We've already maxed out the current audience size we have, so we expand the radius geographically to include more people, but now we're reaching people that are less interested in driving all the way to get to us. You're on the other side of town, it's a 45-minute drive, it's an hour-and-a-half drive and heavy traffic after work. And so we're not interested in going that far. We're going to get diminishing returns on the marketing spend. With that said, maybe that makes sense, and this is really important to think about from a budgeting standpoint. Let's take our PPC example again. We've got our really high intent terms, and let's say we convert really well on those, and we get a 30% margin. So after our marketing spend, after all our overhead costs, we're making 30% on these high intent terms, because these are people that need treatment now. So it's easy for us to convert them into a new patient for us. We max that out, and so now we expand to the second tier. These are people that are thinking about our services. They're not quite convinced they need them, or maybe they're just doing some research. And so we've got 50% of our target audience that is really interested in our services, and we've got 50% that's just doing research. And so we're not going to convert those at the same rate, because 50% of those people that are inquiring or that are hitting the website aren't even interested in services. They're just checking out and doing some research. And so in those situations, maybe our margin is only 15%, because we're paying to reach all those people, but we have a reduced conversion rate. So same cost, but reduced profitability. Now let's go even farther out and say, okay, well now we've tapped out both of these kind of tiers of the search. So we've got our high intent searchers, we've got our mid-tier searchers, then we've got our low tier searchers who aren't really interested at all. But if we really work at it on the phone, if we really work with them when they inquire with us, maybe we can get 5% of them to admit. So let's say we've got a 5% margin on that. Now, if we think about that, each of those tiers is profitable. 30% margins, 15% margins, 5% margins. We're making money at each of those tiers. So it's valuable for us to run marketing campaigns to all of those tiers, even though we're making less money each time. It's still additive, right? We've got our 30% margins that we've maxed out. Now we still want to grow. We want to add more patients, and we grow, but we're only getting 15% margins, and then we're only getting 5%. The same thing happens from a geographic standpoint. The closer people are to you, the easier it is to get them to come into your services. The farther away you get, the harder it is. So you're going to have lower conversion rates. You're going to have to spend more money to reach those people. You have to spend more money to convince them. They're going to need more convincing. They're going to need more trust building from a marketing standpoint. So there's a higher cost to that. Maybe we need higher frequency. Maybe we need better content. Maybe we just need to spend more time with these individuals. And so we have a higher cost that reduces the margin, but it's still profitable every step of the way. Now what happens there is our blended CAC, our blended cost per new patient acquisition, changes. We were getting 30% margins here. Now we added on this 15% margin tier. So really, we're only averaging in the mid-20s now in terms of margin. So my margins have changed. My new patient acquisition cost has actually increased as I've gone to these other tiers that require more effort, they require more investment. But again, I'm still profitable. So we have to be careful, because I see especially smaller providers do this, or sometimes newer executives will say, well, our cost per admission is increasing, and so that's a problem. Well, probably not. You're having more patients in the program, you're making more revenue, and you're making more profit, and so that's a win. Your marketing team is not doing a bad job. They are just moving into different tiers of patients that have different requirements and are going to affect your overall margin. E-com is really used to this. You have a certain high intent consumer base, and then you have the mid intent consumer base that need lots of retargeting. Then you have the low intent ones if you have to retarget to for months and months, and so there's a higher marketing spend there. But each of them is bringing in cumulative profit, and so it's worth it. Now, if you get to the point where you're losing money, then you need to stop, right? That's your point of diminishing returns. You don't want to expand geographically. You don't want to expand from an interest or a tier level standpoint in terms of how interested they are in your services. But always remember that those tiers are going to affect your costs, which it's going to affect your budget, but it can still be a very positive effect overall from a profitability standpoint. Okay, budget questions. We'll run through these really quick in terms of the FAQ. We doubled our spend on a high-performing channel, but it didn't work. As I mentioned, this is usually the case. You can't just double your spend overnight, right? You can't just have one outreach rep and then hire two and expect them to get the same results overnight. They might be stepping on each other's toes. They might be competitive. The new hire might not know where to go. Lots of reasons that it's not going to be as effective. Same thing with your display campaigns, with your PPC campaigns, SEO campaigns. A lot of these take time. They take time to optimize. They take time to find the right audiences, to find the right messaging. As we change tiers, it changes the messaging we need. So if we're on a second tier of people that are only slightly interested, we need a lot more convincing. That requires different ads. It requires different landing pages, and your team is probably going to have to figure that out. They're just not going to know that, oh my God, we're in a new tier of people all of a sudden, and here's the exact messaging and the exact landing page we need to convert this type of person. Like, they're not going to know that out of the gate. So doubling your spend doesn't work overnight. It will work if you can figure out what the new messaging, the new audience, the new channels, the new strategy needs to be. How often should we adjust budget? My answer on this is very rarely. So you should set your budget at the beginning of the year, as I talked about, as a percentage of spend. Fluctuate based on the seasonality. Those decisions should be made, but you don't want to make big budget adjustments for what we just talked about. It messes up the algorithms, it messes up the human teams. We get into new tiers of audiences that have different interests or different needs or in different parts of the patient journey. So we don't want to be flexing our budget. And then also sometimes we'll have providers that will say, okay, well, we're doing really well and our program is full, so we should save money and cut our marketing spend. That's also generally a really, really bad idea. The reason for this is because it takes time to build up these channels. It takes time to build up SEO. It takes time to build up outreach. I mean, imagine you have an outreach rep that's building all these relationships and then you fire him because your program's full. And then 3 months from now, suddenly your census drops or your patient volume drops and you want to bring someone back in. Can that person so if patient volume drops and you need to rehire this person, can you just pick up like that and he just steps back in and starts generating referrals right away? Absolutely not. Now he's got to rebuild those relationships. He's got to get back into the groove. Your marketing campaigns are the same way. We've had a lot of providers in the past that have done this where things are going pretty well. We get a call and they say, hey, we want to cut out the Facebook spend. We want to cut out the X spend because, we're not even really sure how that's working because we don't see a clear click to an inquiry to an admission. So, we're not even sure those are good channels anyway. Let's just kill them. And so we say, okay, we think this is a bad idea, but you're the boss, right? You're the client. Kill the channel. And it's fine for a month or two because these channels built up a lot of goodwill. Just like if you kill your outreach, are you going to stop getting referrals tomorrow just because your outreach person's gone? Like, no, they're not used to seeing that outreach person every day anyway. They only see them once every couple of weeks or once a month. So they don't even notice the difference. But then suddenly 2 to 3 months down the line, while you have competitors that are constantly going and doing outreach to your community referral partners, and now the rep that you had is no longer there. They're not top of mind. They're not building a relationship. Maybe they think you went out of business. Maybe like, oh, that person's gone. Maybe something's going on at that program that I don't know about. I'm going to stop referring over there. I'm going to refer to Jessica, who just walked in my door and seems like they have a really good service that I want to send patients to. The same thing happens with your Facebook campaigns, with your X, your TV, your LinkedIn. When you stop them, there's a delay before you see the negative impact. And so this is what we always see. And suddenly we get a call 3 months later, and they say, my God, census is down, new patient inquiries are down. What's happening? Well, you killed your display spend 3 months ago, and now you're seeing the impact. The problem here, we can't just turn it back on, just like we can't hire a BD rep out of nowhere. So we turn the campaigns back on, but now it's going to take us 2, 3, 6 months to rebuild the cumulative advantage, the mind share we had, the attention, the trust that we were building. All of that has to be rebuilt. We have to re-achieve frequency targets. We have to re-optimize our campaigns. And so now, instead of being down for 1 or 2 months, this provider is going to be down in their inquiry new patient admissions for 3 to 6 months. That's a big impact on the business. For these reasons, you should never be just cutting your marketing spend out of nowhere, even if you're doing really well. You've got it set as a percentage of revenue. If you're doing really well, then the percentage that you end up spending on marketing is probably going to be less for that year, just because you did better than you thought you were going to be. You should be happy with that rather than trying to save an extra $20,000 for a couple months. That's just going to bite you in the ass later. What's a good percentage of revenue for marketing? Again, 1 to 3% for most Medicaid providers, somewhere in the 7 to 12% range for most commercial providers, and then anywhere from 12 to 20% for out-of-network or private pay models. As you increase your margins and increase your total revenue, your top-line revenue, you can usually spend a higher percentage and still be profitable. We're doing well. Should we cut spend? Just talk about that. No, don't do it. How much should we allocate to each channel? Again, just like I walked you through, start with the outreach, then think about your SEO from a per website and a per location standpoint. Think about PPC as a 10% of overall desired admissions for a given month, and then what's your general cost per admission from that channel. Again, I caution you, just because PPC is easier to determine a cost per admission doesn't mean that that's how you should be thinking about it. You should still be thinking about cost per inquiry, and you should definitely not be thinking about your other channels in that way, because that's not how they work. And then finally, you get into the rest pushed into your display campaigns. Display campaigns, max out a particular audience on a display channel. First, make sure you're reaching the entire audience with the frequencies that you're trying to shoot for, usually 3 to 4 a week for beginning campaigns. And then once you've maxed out one display channel, then you can move on to the next display channel. So there's definitely a lot to think about in the budgeting process. This module should have given you a pretty solid framework in terms of how to think about budgeting from an annual basis, as well as per channel capital allocation, some of the nuance that goes into it, how we should think about adjusting budgets or not adjusting budgets. And if you put this framework into place, I guarantee you that you're generally going to have a really good outcome at the end of the day, because you've got consistency, you've got a plan, you've got a multi-channel strategy, and again, $3 billion worth of data. I can tell you that this framework works.